Today was day 8 of the Karen Read trial. I'm going to give you my daily recap. Even though today was a half day, there's still a lot to cover because we are getting into the Albert family. As a reminder, I'm just covering this trial based on what the testimony is and what the jury is seeing. I don't really speculate or go into what has been said on the side or anything like that. First of all, I'm not up to date on everything that's been said by reporters and whatnot. I'm just relaying what was said today in the courtroom. The first person that the prosecution called on the stand was Christopher Albert. He goes by Chris Albert. He's the third oldest of the Albert family, one of 7. He's lived in Canton his whole life. He has really deep ties to Canton. He owns a business on the main street in Canton, which I said in an earlier video was C&E Pizza, but it's actually D&E Pizza. It's right across from the Waterfall Bar. So his plans for Friday evening were to go to the Waterfall to celebrate his nephew's birthday party. His nephew's birthday was the next day, and they were going to celebrate the Friday evening. So we learned that he meets his wife there approximately between like 9:45 and 10 p.m., just a walk across the street over to Waterfall. Chris Albert supposedly is involved deeper into the whole scheme because the incident took place on his brother's front lawn, the oldest brother, Brian Albert's house at 34 Fairview. Chris Albert has 3 sons. His oldest son is Colin Albert, and so they established that relationship. They also established that Chris and Julie Albert, with their 3 sons, lived on Meadow Ave, which is where John O'Keefe lives, his house there with his niece and nephew. They were neighbors. I think they lived at 1 Meadows Ave and John O'Keefe lived at 7 Meadows Ave, or maybe vice versa. But they're very close neighbors. So it's established that he would see him from time to time as a neighbor, and then that's how he became to know John O'Keefe. Once the defense comes up to begin the questioning, that's when things really start to get crazy, because there's a lot of backstory that the jury needs to know about why anybody would have a motive to kill John O'Keefe. I forgot to mention that Chris Albert is also a board selectman, which I think he said 5 in the town of Canton, and it is a newer position for him, but they basically work with like safety in the city, and there's a few other things, but the former police chief donated to his campaign, and he establishes that he does have ties to a lot of Canton police officers because his brother was an officer there. He knows all the major players in this story too. The main thing that stuck out for me when the defense was questioning Chris Albert is the timeline. So he states that he left the Waterfall Bar between 12:05 and 12:10 p.m. It's seen on the surveillance camera that he actually leaves at 12:13, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but he also states that it's only a 5-minute walk from his house, which is a lie because you can clearly look on Google Maps and see that it's exactly a 10-minute walk. It was freezing cold and it was snowing, and by the time he got to his house, he said he was freezing cold. So a 5-minute walk in the snow, I don't know if you would be freezing cold then, but it was actually 10 minutes. So it's really important for the defense to be able to establish this timeline. He says that after he worked all day, he wouldn't admit that he was tired, but he does say he kicked off his shoes. He went up to the 3rd story of his home, and Julie had gone home earlier in the evening. She was there in bed. She had a headache. And then about 15 minutes later is when his son Colin came home to say goodnight to him. This is also a big deal because it's alleged by the defense that Colin is one of the people that fought John O'Keefe that night, which eventually ended up in him dying. There was a lot of questioning about John O'Keefe's house. We already know that John is a little bit OCD when it comes to his home, and apparently he was a little OCD about his lawn. Julie and Chris were asked to watch over his house once when he was on vacation, and they sent pictures of them like on his fence drinking beers or on the porch. We do see 2 of the pictures of him and his wife on the fence, saying like kind of like your house is fine. And this is all important because they have a nickname for him. I want to look it up really quick. They say that John O'Keefe's nickname was Mr. Nevercracker, which I had never heard of, but apparently it's from an animated movie called Monster House. And this line of questioning is basically because he was the type of person that wanted people to stay off of his lawn. It's, I guess, important to know that John O'Keefe had an incident with his youngest son, Dylan. He clarifies that after the prosecution comes back for redirect, that his son Dylan, not Colin, was the one that he was upset with for being on his lawn. Eventually it is cleared up, the situation is cleared up, and John O'Keefe apologizes to Dylan, the son, and brings over a bag of candy to kind of like smooth things over with him. That's pretty much the majority of Chris Albert's testimony, but he was getting red on the stand. It was not really like a good look for him. They bring up Julie Albert, his wife, next, and this is when we get good. We learn that Julie was at the Waterfall Bar with Nicole Albert and Caitlin Albert. She picked them up from their home. They all went to Waterfall together. They picked the table at the restaurant, and you see them there eating and everything. Then she is the one who establishes the timeline of like when everybody is arriving. It is worth mentioning too that Nicole Albert is the homeowner, married to Brian Albert at 34 Fairview. She is also Jen McCabe's sister, so she is Nicole McCabe Albert. Julie testifies that she left the Waterfall Bar because she had a headache, which is very interesting because a lot of the women didn't stay around for the after party. I could see that being true, but a lot of them said that they had headaches. It's just, we'll get into that a little bit more. So she goes home and then she is awake in bed waiting for her husband to come home and waiting for her son to come home. She doesn't go to sleep until her kids are home, she says. And she also says that Colin Albert arrived about 15 minutes or so after her husband had come home. Once we get into the cross-examination by Mr. Yannetti, this is when shit is seriously going down. We learn that Julie used to nanny Courtney Proctor's children, and Courtney Proctor is married to Michael Proctor. He is the state trooper that took over the whole entire case. At this point, when the defense is doing the cross-examination, Mr. Yannetti keeps getting objected to, and the judge is not letting any of these questions in, so it's really frustrating to not be able to hear that side. I felt really bad for Julie because she started to get really red on the stand. I took a screenshot. She was starting to get really red in the face because Mr. Yannetti pulled up her phone log, and she had testified just a second ago that she rarely talked on the phone to Courtney Proctor. I can't remember the exact time frame, but after Karen Read was arrested on February 1st, there was a time frame where they spoke on the phone 67 times. And his exact question was, were you using Courtney Proctor as an intermediary to communicate with Michael Proctor about this case? Her answer was, no, I was not. And then with all of this headway made, the judge, Beverly, shuts it down and says, testimony is done, we're done for the day, 32 minutes earlier than expected to be done. It was supposed to go until 1 p.m. and she ended for the day at 12:28. So it's just really bizarre. Just thinking about what the jury saw, things were starting to get really heated, and that's when the judge shut it all down. So today was a half day. Tomorrow we will be back for a full day.